Hey everyone. On the story for today. Heartbroken husband uncovers wife's affair and shocking pregnancy. His epic revenge will leave you speechless. I was sitting in front of the TV, acting like I cared about the baseball game. It was Saturday afternoon. Jane and I had just had the roast beef dinner she made. As she was cleaning up the dishes, I was watching the game, but only part of the time. Whenever she wasn't looking my way, I found myself watching her. Jane is quite attractive, not necessarily stunning, but definitely easy on the eyes. Her main feature is her curvy figure, tall with light brown hair that falls to her shoulders. Her big brown eyes have a way of looking at you that can really make you feel something. She definitely has that effect on me. We've been married for 7 years now and have 2 lovely daughters, Nancy, who's 5, and Stacy, who's 4. Since we both work full-time jobs, my mom looks after the girls during the day and either Jane or I pick them up from her place after work. After Stacy was born, I had a vasectomy because we felt 2 kids were plenty for us. But right now I wasn't thinking about our daughters, even though they were playing quietly in their room. No, I was concerned about the changes I'd been seeing in Jane over the past few months. These changes, like her new way of dressing and spending more time at work, might not seem like a big deal individually, but altogether they were starting to worry me. Her behavior at home had changed too. It felt like something was on her mind. Often when we were watching TV and I commented on the show or movie, her responses made it clear she wasn't really watching. Her eyes were on the TV and she seemed to be following along, but it was obvious her thoughts were elsewhere. At night in bed, even though our bed life was still pretty active, happening a couple of times a week, she'd spend hours restless before finally falling asleep after we made love. I was sure something was bothering her, but she wasn't opening up about it. I thought it wouldn't be smart to directly ask her what was on her mind, fearing it might make her pull away more. I hoped she'd come forward on her own when she was ready. We used to share everything and talk openly, so why was she keeping things to herself this time? Jane was a fantastic cook and loved experimenting with new recipes for me. She'd spent a lot of time online searching for culinary inspirations and chatting with other food enthusiasts for fresh ideas and recipes. I even knew the nickname she used online, Jenny, a name her dad used to call her because I saw it when I walked past her using the computer. She chatted nearly every night in a food-focused chat room, but I sensed they discussed more than just recipes. Watching her clear the table one evening, an idea suddenly struck me. Why couldn't I just hop on my laptop and sneak into that cooking chat room under a fake name to see what they were chatting about? I thought about pretending to be someone else and talking to her without her knowing it was me. But after giving it more thought, I felt it was wrong and I couldn't bring myself to do it, especially because of the risk of her catching me spying. A week went by and nothing changed. Jane was still distant, hardly noticing our daughters when they tried to get her attention at home. I realized I needed to take action. That's when I decided to go ahead and spy on her chat conversations. The next day at work, I signed up on the same chat platform she used with the username NewMom. I picked that name to make it clear I was pretending to be a woman, thinking it would make the others more comfortable with me there. Jane usually joined her chat room around 8 p.m. after we put our daughters to bed. So on that Tuesday night, I was all set to join her. As soon as I noticed her heading to the small room by the bathroom where her computer was, I stood up and told her I was going downstairs to my office to catch up on some work. She acknowledged with a nod, and I quickly made my way to my home office. Within minutes, I logged into the cooking chat room and waited for her username to show up. There were 5 other women already there, chatting about how to make the perfect cheesecake. 5 minutes passed and I was still looking out for my wife's username at the bottom of the screen. Then one of the women messaged me asking if I had any unique cheesecake recipes. I had no clue about baking, so I escaped the awkward moment by saying I hadn't baked one before and was there to learn from those who knew how. Right as I finished typing, Jenny popped up as the newest participant in the chat. Everyone, including Jenny, started giving me advice on baking cheesecakes, like which cheese to use and the amount needed. Before long, the chat room grew to about 12 people, all trying to chat, making it hard to keep up with the conversation. I asked Jenny to email me her cheesecake recipe, so I gave her a newly made Hotmail address specifically for this reason. The next day at work, I found an email from Jenny with the recipe. I was excited because I now had her email address, which was completely new to me. I was surprised because my wife had never kept anything from me before. I felt guilty for the rest of the day, knowing she must never find out that NewMom was actually me, her husband. The next day I emailed her back saying I tried the recipe. The cake was fantastic and my husband loved it. Soon we started emailing back and forth and then began chatting outside the cooking chat room. We added each other as friends on the chat site, allowing us to talk anytime without needing to be in the cooking section. Meanwhile, Jane's behavior at home and towards me got worse over the next 2 weeks. Our intimate life suffered, dropping to just once a week, and it was clear she wasn't enjoying it like before. It felt as though she was just going through the motions, mainly staying in one position and not participating much. Despite this, we kept writing and chatting, and I started to feel less guilty about it. I realized I needed to figure out what was happening to try and save our marriage. It felt like our relationship was headed in a bad direction because she was becoming increasingly distant from me and our kids. Our intimate life was also declining in quality and frequency. It seemed like her focus on us was taking a back seat to something else on her mind. She was still a dedicated mom, and I knew she'd do anything for our family. But clearly something was troubling her deeply, and I needed to discover what it was. I started to think she might be involved with someone else. I was willing to do whatever it took to uncover the truth. Hiring a private investigator was out of the question due to a lack of funds, and I couldn't spy on her at work since I knew little about her workplace or her colleagues. We both worked full-time. She had a large law firm and myself at a big bank, both of us sticking to similar schedules. So one night during our chat, I decided to get more personal with her. We had gotten comfortable with each other by this point, and it was time for me to start digging for information. I lied, saying my name was Lucy and that I lived in Florida right away. She mentioned her name was Jane and she lived in Ohio. Then she asked me, "Lucy, what do you do for work?" Jane replied. She was a legal secretary handling contracts and legal paperwork for the lawyers at her firm and asked about my job. Caught off guard, I quickly made up that I'm currently not working because I'm on maternity leave. But I'll be returning to work in a couple of weeks as a bank teller, Jane then shared. Oh, my husband also works at a bank. His name is Jack, and he's a programmer there. What's your husband's name? This was going better than I expected. Jane was sharing information that I already knew to be true, and I was eager to ask her more personal questions. I replied, his name is Lawrence, and he's in insurance sales. After that, we shifted the conversation to cooking and other topics. I didn't want to overdo it, so I planned to delve deeper into her personal life and job during our next chat. We didn't get to chat for the next 2 nights, and on the third day I emailed her saying that my bank's manager called me in for an emergency, asking me to come back a week early from leave with extra pay and cash. I expressed my excitement and anxiety about returning to work. I had decided to tell Jane a fabricated story that I had an affair with a CEO worker at the bank. This plan was to make my wife feel comfortable sharing secrets with her new friend. By confiding in her about a made-up affair I was having, I thought if she was unfaithful, she'd be more inclined to discuss it. At this point, Jane, you said in your email that returning to work scared you. Why, Lucy? I'm not sure I should share this, but you're my closest friend, so I will. I just hope you won't think less of me once you know what I've done. Jane, everyone makes mistakes. We're only human. What happened? Did you steal from the bank, Lucy? No, it's not like that at all. I got to know a man at work named Roberto. We started off as friends and then became a lot more. If you catch my drift. I proceeded to confess to her about my ongoing affair with this man for over a year, detailing how it started and our weekly meetings after work on Fridays. I mentioned that being with him was thrilling and enjoyable. Yet I still loved my husband and didn't want this affair to wreck our marriage. My sharing this story seemed to upset Jane as she let me continue without interrupting with any questions for quite a while. I could picture her sitting in that small room on the ground floor in front of her computer, perhaps pondering over the parallels to her own situation, assuming she was being unfaithful. Finally, she did pose a question to Lucy, and I saw it slowly appear on my screen. But you just had a baby. Are you sure your husband is the dad? Lucy. Honestly, I'm not sure who the father is, and that's why he can never find out about my affair. Next, I acted as if I was breaking down in tears and typed that I had to leave because I was too upset to keep typing. Later, when I entered the kitchen, Jane was sitting in front of the TV, but it was clear she wasn't really watching it, just lost in thought as usual. I joined her on the couch, and when I took her hand, she looked at me, her eyes red from crying. After a short conversation, she suggested going to bed, which I understood as her wanting to be intimate. I was more than ready, especially since it had been a week since we last were together in bed. We were intimate and cuddled for over an hour before falling asleep in each other's arms. Reflecting on our marriage the next day at work, I wondered if the fake online friendship I had created with my wife was beneficial. It did lead to us being intimate the night before, but I hadn't learned anything new from her. I figured I first needed to establish a trustful atmosphere so Jane would feel comfortable sharing secrets with her friend Lucy, especially now that she believed Lucy had a secret too. Jane and Lucy didn't communicate over the weekend, but on Monday I emailed Jane from work, pretending to be excited about a conversation I had with Roberto, marking the first in 3 months. I was eager to share this with her. That evening, after the kids went to bed, I went to my office in the basement, logged on to my computer, and waited for Jane to come online for our chat. "I'm so happy to chat with you tonight. I've got some good news," I began, ready to share. Jane responded, acknowledging my email and joking that she could guess why I was in such high spirits. Roberto was just as excited to finally speak with me again, and I could feel he still has feelings for me. It made me really happy, I shared. "But if he really cared, why didn't he call or try to meet up with you these past 3 months?" she questioned. "Lucy calling was not an option because I think Lawrence started suspecting something, and I'm almost certain he's monitoring our home phone. Checking my cell phone is easy for him when he looks at the bill," I explained. "Jane, but why didn't you meet him in a motel like before when you were working?" she asked. "Lucy, that wouldn't have been possible. I was pregnant and didn't feel good about my appearance. Plus, I doubt Roberto wanted to be with someone who was pregnant," I replied. We continued the conversation for another 30 minutes, and I could sense Jane wasn't impressed with the fictional Roberto I described. I aimed to highlight the negative aspects of infidelity by portraying Roberto as a narcissistic, stereotypical cheater. Jane and Lucy didn't chat on Tuesday, but when Wednesday came, we talked again. During this chat, Jane opened up about her own issues over the last couple of months. The conversation lasted more than an hour, and that's when I discovered she was indeed involved with someone else, a lawyer who was also her boss. She revealed the man's name was Jason Weldon, and he was a married lawyer with a child who also happened to be her boss. I had heard Jane mention Jason a few times before, but she hadn't brought up his name at all in the last few months. Their relationship started nearly a year back during a trip to Atlanta for a convention. A detail Jane omitted when she told me about the trip. She led me to believe she was traveling with another secretary, making it seem like they were the only two attending. She had justified the trip by saying it would look good for her job performance review and could help her get a raise. Jane shared with Lucy that on their first evening in Atlanta, after a group dinner, she and her boss had drinks in the hotel lounge. The evening progressed with an invitation to his room for more wine, which eventually led to intimate moments, despite the initial regret and guilt she felt after their first encounter. She found herself repeating the experience the next night, spending it in his room. Reading my wife's confession left me utterly shocked. I couldn't understand how she could betray our family like this. She didn't just have an affair with this guy once. She did it twice, even spending the whole night with him on the second occasion. Eager to know more, I continued to probe into her current situation with her boss, and she openly shared everything. Here's the gist. After returning from the convention, she felt awful and stayed away from him for a few weeks. However, she eventually gave in to his persistent pursuit, and they resumed their affair. Initially they were discreet, using his office after hours, but then they started using a room at the Hilton for their trysts, meeting there once a week and also sneaking around in his office a few times a week. The rage I felt reading her admission was indescribable. I had to restrain myself from confronting her violently, but as my anger cooled, a desire for vengeance took its place. It became clear my marriage was irreparable, and my only focus was on making her pay for the damage to our relationship. Then, posing as Lucy, I inquired if she had feelings for Jason Weldon. Her response was immediate and unequivocal. She didn't love him. She professed her greater love for her husband, but admitted the physical connection with Jason was irresistible, likening it to an addiction. She confessed the affair had been going on for over a year, with their encounters happening 3 to 4 times a week, far more frequently than she was intimate with me. I remembered all the times I really wanted to be intimate with her, but she always had some reason to avoid it. However, from what she told Lucy, it seemed she was always willing and excited to be with him. She was sharing something with him that should have been exclusive to our relationship. I felt like I was paying the price while he enjoyed her without restraint. No wonder I had sensed a change in her behavior for a while. Thinking about it, I figured she might be planning to leave me for Jason, but considering he was married with a kid, I wondered if he was truly in love with my wife, if he saw her as a better match, or if the thrill of the affair was what really appealed to him. After chatting with Jane for over an hour, I felt completely drained. There were still many questions left unanswered, but I needed time to process everything I had discovered. So I excused myself, saying the baby needed me and promised we'd talk again in a day or two before saying goodbye. What should a man do when he finds out his life is falling apart? When he realizes his wife is not only his, but is also frequently involved with another man? When he hears from her that being with this man is addictively pleasurable, making it something she feels she can't give up? Sure, she claimed to love me more than anything, but how could I overlook the fact that she's repeatedly sharing herself with someone else? How is it possible for her to love our daughters and me while simultaneously betraying us? She was engulfed in a world of desire while I was trapped in my own world of suffering, agony, and neglect. I was determined to make her suffer for the damage she caused our family. The ultimate punishment I could think of was to take her daughters away from her. I planned to divorce her and fight to get full custody of our girls. For her, losing them would be the most devastating outcome. I could then relocate to a different state to make it harder for her to see them, turning her life into a nightmare. I also planned to inform Jason's wife about the affair and consider legal action against their workplace for contributing to the ruin of my marriage. But my first step was to gather evidence of her affair with Jason. Pretending everything was normal around her became incredibly hard after discovering the affair. However, she was too absorbed in her secret life to notice my despair. So for Jane, life continued almost unchanged from the past year. It had been 2 days since she last communicated with Lucy. That morning, pretending to be Lucy, I emailed her to see if she'd be available to chat that evening. She responded affirmatively, planning to meet at their regular time. I had a list of questions ready for her, knowing her answers would hurt, but needing to understand her feelings for Jason and her future intentions. I was at my computer, ready to chat before the kids were even asleep, and greeted her as soon as she logged in. "Lucy, I'm so relieved we're talking again. I've been reflecting on our last conversation nonstop," Jane said. "I hope my previous words didn't upset you too much or make you think poorly of me, Lucy. Who am I to judge you? I've done things way worse than you. We're both just human after all. Being able to talk to you about everything has really helped me. I don't have anyone else who gets what I'm going through. I usually share everything with my husband, but obviously this topic is off limits." Laugh out loud. "Do you think your husband has any clue about what's happening, Lucy?" "No, he doesn't suspect a thing. He trusts me completely. If he did find out, he'd lose it. He can get pretty intense, and I don't want to set him off. You mentioned before that your husband got a vasectomy after your youngest was born. Aren't you scared that Jason could get you pregnant?" "I'm not worried about that because I've been on birth control pills for over a year, ever since things started with Jason. You've got to be keeping those pills hidden, right? He can't know you're on them, Lucy." "Yes, they're stashed away safely. I have a 3-month supply hidden in a shoebox in my bedroom. I take my pill every morning while he's in the shower." I could sense my wife enjoyed sharing with her friend how she was managing to deceive me. She wasn't just betraying me. She seemed to take pleasure in making me look foolish, but I was gearing up to confront her with a major question. "Are you planning to leave your husband for Jason, Lucy?" "That's not going to happen. I truly love my husband and I don't have feelings for Jason. The closeness with Jason is exciting, but it's just that there's no love. That's why I'm so torn. I want to keep seeing Jason, but I don't want my husband to find out. You're trying to have the best of both worlds. How you really think your husband won't eventually find out?" "He won't. Jason and I are very cautious. Plus, Jason has his own marriage to worry about. He'd be in big trouble if his wife discovered our affair." "Is Jason better in bed than your husband? Is he larger?" "My husband is a great lover, but Jason is, well, he's different. The thrill and risk of getting caught enhance it for me. And yes, Jason is slightly larger, but it doesn't really change things. With my husband, it's making love, but with Jason, it's just closeness. Do you get what I'm saying?" I was appalled at how lightly my wife was discussing her affair, treating it almost like a casual game. I needed to find out if she understood the pain and harm she was causing our daughters and me, with her mind often consumed by her lover and avoiding detection. Risking the dynamic with Lucy, I pressed. "Aren't you neglecting your husband? He must be feeling left out because of your affair, right? After a long silence, she finally responded. My wife hadn't considered how her actions were impacting me. We still have intimate moments. It's less frequent, but I don't think he minds. He loves me deeply. Besides, I can't be intimate with him right after being with Jason. He'd surely catch on. Aren't you worried he might seek affection elsewhere, given the lack of attention at home, Lucy? I hadn't thought of it like that. Now you've got me worried. I didn't mean to frighten you, but it's something to consider. Our conversation shifted to other topics before wrapping up. Near the end, my wife excitedly told Lucy about a planned trip to Atlanta with Jason in a few weeks, a trip she hadn't mentioned to me. That night, both of us struggled to fall asleep. I chose not to make a move on my wife that night, and she didn't seem interested either. It was a while before I could drift off to sleep, and I noticed Jane was struggling too. Lying there, I decided I'd talk to her the next day, Saturday, in hopes of possibly salvaging our marriage. The next morning, as we sat at the kitchen table, I broached the subject. Jane, have you realized our intimacy has really dropped off these past few months? We went from being close several times a week to hardly once. It's been nearly 2 weeks since we've been together. What's going on? Are you seeing someone else? She paused her fork midair, clearly taken aback by my blunt question. This was a first in our 7 years of marriage. You're really bold to confront me like this, she replied. Jane usually calls me Jake, but resorting to Jack means she's upset or trying to emphasize her point. Her look was one of intense annoyance. How can you question my loyalty after all these years? I've been juggling work and home, and it's natural for our physical relationship to cool off a bit over time. I think it's unfair for you to even suggest such a thing. I'm not accusing you outright, Jane, but you've changed significantly this past year. Even our daughters feel it. They hardly come to you with their issues anymore. They come to me. Her reaction grew even more furious. At that moment, I realized it was futile to try and discuss our issues any further. We only have 24 hours each day, and I can't always be there to tend to every need of our kids. It's only right that you pitch in too. It was obvious from her sudden change in expression that she hadn't fully considered her words before speaking. Referring to her own children as brats isn't something a caring mother would do. She seemed to realize her mistake shortly after, but the damage was done. She couldn't unsay what was said. Her facial expression shifted from anger to distress, and she quickly left for her bedroom. It became clear to me that any attempt at conversation was futile. Often people resort to tears to escape a conversation that's not going their way, so I let the issue drop for the time being. That Saturday afternoon, Jane went out shopping, a routine for her each week. I suspected she was probably looking for something new to wear for her trip with Jason to Atlanta. With her out and the kids preoccupied in their room, I decided to search our bedroom for her birth control pills. It took me about 15 minutes, but I found them in her closet, just as she had described to Lucy, hidden in a shoebox with a pair of shoes. The pills were in a plastic case, and there were 2 more sealed packs in the box, indicating she had been on them for a year, likely starting around the time her affair with Jason began. Knowing I had a vasectomy, she would have no explanation for a pregnancy other than admitting to the affair. A mix of sadness, anger, and pity washed over me at that moment. She wasn't the loving wife I had married 7 years ago. Where had the woman gone who used to care so deeply for me? It felt like I had lost her forever. Holding the pill dispenser, I pondered the future of our family and what this meant for our daughters. I now realized that my marriage had come to an end, yet I was certain I couldn't let my daughter stay under her sole care. Tears overwhelmed me as I sat on our bed, clutching the open pill case. Despair soon took over my sadness, followed by a strong desire for revenge against both my wife and her lover while sitting there, teary-eyed and upset. A plan started forming in my head. It was a harmful scheme, far removed from anything a kind-hearted person would consider. But my heart no longer had space for mercy or forgiveness. Bitterness and anger had consumed me. I carefully removed a pill from the case, then took my daughters over to my mother's place before heading to a pharmacy. I spent half an hour scanning the shelves for exactly what I needed and ended up choosing 2 types of white round pills similar in size to my wife's birth control pills. The label on one bottle indicated the pills were for liver issues, while the other was baby aspirin. After purchasing them, I compared these new pills with one from my wife's pack at home. The baby aspirin pill fit perfectly into the dispenser, albeit being slightly thicker. I proceeded to replace all the pills in the current pack with the ones I had bought. After putting everything back in place, I went to pick up my daughters. I hoped they wouldn't mention the visit to their grandmother's when my wife got home, but I had already thought of an excuse for why they were there, just in case. Life continued, and the next Tuesday, Jane mentioned she'd be going to another conference in Atlanta for a couple of days, tagging along with a secretary from her office, though she didn't specify who while she was away. She didn't call us even once. Despite her absence, our daughters didn't seem to miss her, but I did. The day after she left, I used a payphone to call her workplace, asking for Jason Weldon, only to learn he was also out of town, expected back the next week. I had no doubts about where he was, likely with Jane. Upon her return, Jane greeted me with a hug right away. That evening, after putting our daughters to bed, she led me to our bedroom and we were intimate for nearly 2 hours. I wondered if her actions were an attempt to compensate for not calling or if she felt guilty for her time with Jason. Maybe she was trying to make amends for her earlier harsh words about our daughters by connecting with me physically. It seemed she was trying to mend our relationship by offering herself to me, treating intimacy as a favor rather than a shared aspect of our marriage. Over the last year, it felt like Jason had become her priority, sidelining me in her life, though she might not have fully realized the extent of her actions. Her behavior made me feel like a second option compared to Jason, despite everything. I deeply enjoyed being close to her that night. It felt rejuvenating, like a much-needed breath of fresh air. For me, being intimate with Jane was always amazing, and despite my love for her, I was still set on getting back at her somehow. Jane and my fictional persona Lucy kept up their bi-weekly conversations. During these talks, I pretended to rekindle a relationship with an imaginary Roberto, sharing fabricated stories of our encounters to provoke Jane into revealing her own experiences with Jason. This strategy was my way of uncovering what she was up to with her affair. Shockingly, I found out she was doing things with Jason she'd never done with me, leaving me heartbroken. Her actions contradicted her claims of loving me more than anything. I couldn't understand how she could profess such love while treating me with growing neglect and indifference. Despite altering her birth control pills, I continued to monitor the stash to see if she was still using them, noting a daily decrease. Once she used up a dispenser, I would swap out the pills in the new one she started. A few weeks later, I noticed a change in Jane. She became more attentive to me and our daughters, showing more warmth and presence at home. However, about 2 weeks post her trip to Atlanta, she came home visibly troubled one afternoon when I inquired about her distress. She burst into tears and retreated to her room. Although I had suspicions about the cause of her upset, finding out she hadn't taken her birth control for the last 2 days confirmed it. Jane was pregnant, which is why she stopped taking her daily birth control pill. As soon as I could, I swapped the aspirin I had placed in the dispenser with the Rio birth control pills I had stored in my office. I did this just in case she tried to return the pills, complaining they didn't work as expected. Things were starting to escalate, and I anticipated that it wouldn't be long before the consequences of her 15-month affair began to severely impact her. The brief moments of joy she found in her lover's arms were not worth the upcoming anguish and distress. Despite my attempts to get her to talk about what was troubling her, she wouldn't confess to her affair or her pregnancy. Even if she had come clean then, I still would have pursued a divorce and fought for sole custody of our daughters. But it would have stopped my quest for revenge right there. Instead, she continued to deceive me, even with a child that wasn't mine growing inside her. I wasn't yet ready to reveal that I knew about her affair and pregnancy. I needed more evidence of her infidelity since I planned to sue her employer for contributing to the demise of our marriage. It had been a couple of weeks since Jane last spoke to Lucy, since just before her trip to Atlanta, and I was curious if she would share news of her pregnancy with her fictional friend. As soon as I noticed her getting on her computer after we had put the kids to bed, I dashed to the basement to start chatting with her online. She shared details about her trip to Atlanta, even boasting to Lucy about how much she enjoyed spending those nights with Jason. She confessed they had spent a large part of those nights being intimate. On a whim, Lucy questioned her willingness to leave her husband for Jason. To my surprise, my wife insisted she would never leave me because she loved me, clarifying her relationship with Jason was purely physical without any emotional attachment. What shocked me more was her claim about wanting to end her affair with Jason and return to being a devoted wife to me. Yet she omitted any mention of her pregnancy. If she thought we could simply go back to how things were before her infidelity, she was in for a shock. For over a year, she had been intimately involved with Jason, denying me the affection that was supposed to be mine by right. Then, on a Friday evening, she confessed to Lucy that she was expecting Jason's child, and they intended to visit a private clinic for an abortion. She detailed their plan to travel to a clinic in Red River in 2 weeks, aiming to stay there for a few days post-procedure for recovery. I documented everything she said to use it against her later. The next day, I took time off work to drive to Red River, an hour away. Posing as Jane's husband, I confirmed her appointment at the clinic for the abortion on the 14th. I obtained written confirmation, complete with the clinic stamp, and also learned the name of the doctor scheduled to perform the procedure. Dr. Keith Miller. A week later, as we were all seated for a meal, Jane told me she needed to go to another important conference in Atlanta, staying away for 2 more nights. She also mentioned this would be her final work-related trip. I wasn't exactly thrilled, aware of the real reason for her travel. And she seemed surprised by my lackluster reaction to her announcement. I was already aware her affair was winding down, which likely explained her decision to stop attending these conferences. However, by this point, it was far too late for any chance of reconciliation from my side. I took Wednesday the 14th off and watched Jane leave early that morning. She kissed me goodbye and headed to the airport in her Toyota, planning to leave it there and proceed with Jason to Red River. After she left, I drove to Red River myself, parking outside the clinic with a clear view of its entrance. When they arrived, I managed to capture clear photos of them entering the clinic together. After making sure they were inside, I left to avoid being spotted. By the afternoon of the 16th, I was already home, having secretly taken 2 weeks off from work. Jane came home looking worn and surprised to find me there so early. By then I had everything in place on the day Jane headed for Red River. I had met with my lawyer and later visited the firm where Jane worked to speak with Ronald Ross, the firm's president. I laid out the entire situation to him, detailing my wife's affair with Jason Weldon, including her pregnancy and their trip to a clinic in Red River for an abortion. I mentioned my plans to divorce her and sue both Jason for ruining our marriage and the firm for not upholding professional boundaries between bosses and employees. I emphasized my readiness to take this matter to court, armed with solid evidence, including photos of Jason and my wife at the clinic. Understanding the potential for negative publicity towards the firm, he requested a day to consult with his team. They conducted their due diligence, questioning other secretaries and verifying my claims with the clinic. After discussions, we reached an agreement for a settlement of half $1 million to avoid suing the firm. Additionally, Jason and my wife were to be terminated from their positions. However, considering my wife's role as the mother of our children and not wanting her to struggle financially or rely on welfare, I negotiated for her to receive her salary for another year and have her counseling and health care costs covered for the next 5 years. We came to an agreement, and after extensive talks between my lawyer and theirs, the necessary documents were drafted and signed by me. Then, a check was issued to my lawyer, dated for after the completion of my divorce, to ensure my wife couldn't claim any of it. I was ready to confront Jane. Having already arranged for divorce papers in a restraining order to prevent her from coming near our home or daughters during the divorce proceedings, in a letter included with the divorce paperwork, I warned her that if she contested the divorce terms, I'd pursue full custody of our daughters in court, ensuring she'd lose any access to them. When Jane returned home the next day, unaware of her impending divorce and job loss until possibly Monday, I was there to meet her. She was caught off guard by my presence in the early afternoon. "Jack, why are you home already and why didn't you pick up the girls first?" I explained I took the day off because we needed to talk, which is why I hadn't picked up our daughters from my mother's yet. "What's so urgent that you needed to take the day off?" she asked. I told her about discovering something a few weeks back while fixing a light in our walk-in closet, leading to a box falling and revealing its contents. I then presented the shoebox with the birth control dispensers to her on the living room table, asking for an explanation. The overnight bag she was carrying dropped to the floor as her face turned pale, briefly showing a look of shock before it quickly changed. Suddenly, she cried out in panic. Oh God, no, this can't be happening." She had to sit on the couch arm because her leg couldn't hold her up anymore, her body rocking back and forth, sitting there, covering her face with her hands. She looked truly pitiful. "So, my loyal wife," I continued, "can you explain these pills? Why are you scared of getting pregnant when you know I had a vasectomy after our second child? Unless, of course, you've been unfaithful." "Jack. Listen, please, I can explain. You're making this seem much worse than it is. Just hear me out, she begged, her face full of worry and fear, lips quivering and hands shaking, her eyes watery and begging. Despite her pleas, I continued to confront her about her cheating. You've been unfaithful for who knows how long, and now you think you can just explain away all the deceit. I don't love him, Jack. It's over. I've always loved you. We need to talk. There has to be a way to fix this, she pleaded, tears staining her blouse, her eyes red and swollen from the stress and emotion she was under. How can you claim to love me when you've been having an affair? You've broken our marriage vows, betrayed me and our daughters. I'll tell you everything. I hope you can understand, Jack. This happened out of the blue, and there was never any love involved. Yes, we definitely need to talk. You owe me a thorough explanation, especially about your so-called business trip to Atlanta, or more accurately, to Red River. The shock on her face could not have been greater if I had physically struck her. She stared at me, speechless, her mouth agape and eyes filled with fear. She attempted to speak, but no clear words came out. Yes, Jane, I'm fully aware of the Red River trip and the real reason you went there. Care to fill me in on any details I might be missing? Suddenly, she fled to her room in tears. I stood there, contemplating whether to follow her, concerned she might harm herself, but I found myself unable to check on her. She remained in her room for 2 hours, eventually taking a shower after a lengthy period of crying. When she emerged in her long gown, the toll of her emotions was evident on her face, which bore the mark of deep suffering. Seated across from me at the kitchen table without meeting my gaze, she asked, Jack, what are you going to do? I don't want to lose you. I'll do anything to make it right. I think it's a bit late for that, I replied. Remember the months I spent trying to reach out to you, how much I wanted to be close to you. I would have done anything you asked, but you were reserving yourself for your affair, denying me what was mine by right. You've been eroding the love I had for you, Jane. Now there's hardly anything left. She broke down again, her head buried in her arms on the table. Forgive me, Jack. Please tell me you still love me, she pleaded. In that moment, part of me wanted to comfort her. Despite everything, my love for her was as strong as ever, but I knew acknowledging that would be a mistake. In a calm voice, I insisted she reveal everything, the identity of her lover, how they met, and what they had done together. She ended up telling me everything. I believed her because what she shared matched what I already knew. She admitted to her abortion in Red River and confessed to being intimate with Jason several times a week, including encounters in his office and weekly motel meetings. We barely spoke for the rest of the weekend, and first thing Monday morning she received the divorce papers at her office. Shortly afterward, the company president informed her and Jason that they were being terminated. Because of the restraining order, she couldn't return home, but she called me at noon, utterly shattered. Before ending the call, I informed her I'd sent her clothes to her mother's house since she had no reason to come by our home anymore, and I'd changed all the locks. I found out later that she had a breakdown and was hospitalized right after our conversation. She was at her mother's when she called, and her mother had to call an ambulance. 2 weeks on, she agreed to the divorce terms. I arranged for her to visit our daughters for a few hours on Saturdays at my mother's house. 6 months later, our marriage was officially over. Her mother told me she was deeply depressed, undergoing therapy, had lost significant weight, and hardly left her house since losing her job. Over time, I allowed her more access to our daughters, even unsupervised visits and weekends at her mother's. I noticed. The girls were growing closer to their mother, foreseeing potential issues. A year post-divorce, my mother's cancer diagnosis meant she couldn't look after the girls during work hours. Jane reached out, offering to take over the caregiving role for our daughters during my work hours. Jane, I'm not sure what to think. Is that really a practical idea? Your parents' home is almost 30 miles away, and that daily commute could be too exhausting for the kids. Plus, I don't want our daughters to get the wrong impression that we might reconcile. I could tell my words might hurt her, yet she didn't visibly react to my refusal or the implication behind it. I declined her suggestion outright, recognizing my own inability to provide full-time care for our daughters and my financial constraints against hiring a nanny. However, a few weeks later, a settlement from Jane's former employer provided me with sufficient funds to employ a nanny for the girls. A year into the future, I was in a relationship with Maria, a kind widow without children of her own, whom my daughters adore and have embraced as a maternal figure. Gradually, I moved on from Jane, limiting our interactions to only the times she visits the girls. Well folks, that will be all for today. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. Stay safe everyone.